As Mac mentioned, I'm gonna kind of be stepping in for Attorney Whiteside, so I'm just gonna give you a brief bio of who she is, how the project was created, and then I'm gonna pass it over to Mac so he can talk further in depth about REICI as a whole. So, Attorney Latoya Whiteside, she's a senior attorney at Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts. She's the founder and director of the Racial Equity and Corrections Initiative, which was the first racial equity program at the organization. She was the first African-American attorney hired at PLS since its inception since 1972. She joined the organization as a staff attorney in October 2018, and although her work has always focused on forging connections in communities of color and improving the conditions of Black and brown prisoners throughout Massachusetts, during the wake of George Floyd's murder, Attorney Whiteside was able to use the momentum from his tragic loss of life to advocate for the creation of REICI, which focuses on challenging the disparate impact of Black and brown prisoners in the day-to-day operations of corrections. She also directs the RISE project, whose aim is to ensure equitable access to medication-assisted treatment for Black and brown prisoners. So REICI, racial equity is evident in every stage of the criminal justice system. Much of the available data, though limited, focus on front issues, policing, arrest, prosecutorial decisions, sentencing, and reentry. However, little data is available which sheds light on the experiences of Black and brown prisoners during their incarceration. No Department of Corrections in the country is legislatively mandated to collect substantive racial demographics. Recognizing the lack of data, REICI collaborated with Black and brown prisoners to create a 51-page survey that captures the various areas in which BIPOC prisoners experience systemic and individual racial discrimination. REICI collected the names of over 1,200 Black and brown prisoners in Massachusetts state prisons, the Department of Corrections. Surveys were then distributed via mail and later in person due to multiple obstacles that were put in place by the Department of Corrections to halt the effort. To date, we have received 547 completed surveys and are in the process of distributing another 700 surveys to prisoners who reported issues with submission of their surveys. We have partnered with professors at Boston University and David Knight, a professor at Columbia University, in order to aggregate the survey data using Qualtrics. This process has been slow because we lack necessary funding to keep a consistent staff to work on the initiative. We are also in need of a team to assist with writing the report. The report would chronicle race relations in the Massachusetts corrections beginning in the 1970s during John Boone's era, the first Black commissioner of the Department of Corrections, until present. Once this process is concluded, we will publish the findings in a report. In addition to building public awareness around these issues, the report will serve as a guideline for the Racial Equity and Corrections Initiative, so REICI's future initiatives, as well as the launching pad for legislation that we are currently drafting, which would mandate the Department of Corrections to collect substantive racial demographics and would also include an oversight component. If the legislation is successful, Massachusetts will be the first state in the country to mandate this type of data collection. So I will now pass it over back to Max so he could talk a little bit more in depth about the projects that we do also within REICI, specifically the Canteen Project and the Prisoner Empowerment Project.
Thank you. So one of the initiatives that REICI has really, in its creative form, really addressed is the lack of economic benefit for Black and brown folks behind the wall. And what they did is created a PEP project, which is called Empowerment. What's that? Prisoner Empowerment Program. Cool. And what that does is that hire liaisons that currently are in every institution that works with the Department of Corrections, whether that's through programs, instituting programs, avocation of any sort. Usually what we do is identify those individuals and then we hire them as liaisons so that they then can earn a wage of $200 or more for their service. And generally what we're trying to do is put the emphasis on the value of their contribution, right? And we are hoping that other agencies will follow after us, because what we have to offer as individuals or formerly incarcerated is of value, right? And as you can see that with most of the movements that are happening from behind the wall that are leading outside here. So the second project that we have is really near and dear to my heart. It's a documentary that we started from that really chronicled John Boone's history in the Department of Corrections and the Black and Brown experience of many generations that came after him from 1972 all the way through to the present, right? And what we're trying to do is show the generational impact on everyone, even though they may have classified it, called it, termed it differently. We were all talking about access to this 1972 omnibus bill, which we're still being deprived of today. And that many of us don't really know a lot about, right? And so these individual struggles, although they take on different forms, really are around this one specific topic. And what the documentary does is show that to a straight effect, right? And we hope to have at least the first showing of it in the next few months. It's presently in this editing phase. We do want to interview a couple more individuals. Some of the panelists on our first panels, and a photographer had actually been interviewed for the documentary. So it's really informative. It's really informative. The other project we have, I think I don't want to miss any. So correct me if I'm wrong. What is the last one? The Canteen Project. So the Canteen Project really deals with cultural stuff that are not afforded to Black and Browns, whether it's hygienical, whether it's just the way that the diets are different, that has never been addressed. Everything centered in the Department of Correction has been actually determined on a white-based view of status quo. Whatever white folks or whatever white inmates they determine that white inmates need is enough for everyone, right? And even though they recognize that, at least they say they recognize to a large degree that there are distinguishable differences culturally, there has not been the acknowledgement physically, right, to actually allow us to exist in the way that we need to. So there's a constant fight going on for this, and we have joined that fight in trying to create canteen accessible items that Black and Brown folks actually need. So just to give you that overview, and what I want to do at this time is go into our panelist discussion, because we're a little bit behind time and we gotta stop a little bit late. But what I'd like to be able to do is kind of go into our discussion and first introduce our panelists one by one, starting at the end. Brother, can you introduce yourself and how long you've been in?
My name is Kinsel Weaver, and I was in jail when I was 16, and I just got out in November. I'm 36 now. So, juvenile lifer, that's what they like to call us, and yeah, I'm just working on my reentry right now. This is November, and I'm just working on just placing my life back together, because I feel like a time traveler. Really everything, like the culture is different, just everything out here is different than when I went in. So it's like me relearning everything. And it's been a struggle, but that's part of the whole reentry and growth process. So taking it in stride.
Good afternoon. Good morning still. Minister Randy Muhammad. I'm the minister of Muhammad Mosque number 11 of Nation of Islam. I also served as a chaplain in Massachusetts, really for the better part of 29 years, from working in the county to the state, and even service in federal institutions in Fort Devens. I served between 2006 and 2020 as the only Nation of Islam chaplain working in the Department of Corrections, servicing all of the state prisons. So I'm happy to be here to talk about my experiences as a civilian, so to speak, someone going behind the walls to provide services, and my observations of what's going on there and what we can do to fix it.
Peace. My name is Supreme Hassan. Today's my 32nd day home following 33 years of incarceration. I left as an 18-year-old, thank you, and I'm a 51-year-old. Today I'm a responsible party. I respond according to my abilities, saying that for the last 29 years, starting in Walpole inside of a gang block, I've been a community builder, a mentor, a nonviolent advocate. One of the most important works that I've done to date was bringing 27 gang impacted and involved young men at MCI Shirley together to start what we call smoke-free zones. And prior to that, 13 years ago, I started the Restorative Justice Initiative at MCI Norfolk. And throughout that period of time, I've been constantly moved from prison to prison because working while Black. And today is an honor to be here at the call of my brother, because he is also a servant leader, and wherever there's service to be done, that's where we show up at. Peace.
Peace. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Baxter, and I'm also a returning citizen. I did 19 years in the MCI Massachusetts Correctional Facility. I've been home roughly going on 15 months. I too began this journey behind the wall and came into my purpose and began building under the leadership of this man to my left, organizing from behind the wall politically and culturally behind the wall. So I stand on his soldiers when I do the work I do, and I always give him his flowers. I'm just happy to be here. I mean, I'm still in my transition, but I've been nothing less than blessed since I've been home. I'm currently the CEO and founder of my own company called Motivational Dreamers, and what we do is a consulting and public speaking company. And what we do is specialize in helping corporations, universities, and any type of organizations reach their fullest potential. And what that looks like, it comes from leadership and company culture to overcoming adversity and obstacles. I've been truly blessed to be in this position. For hopefully employing more people in the near future. And I'm just here to share my experiences.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome home, guys.
There you go. Oh, yeah. Welcome home.
And my name is Matt Hudson. I'm presently the community liaison of REICI and paralegal. And I also served 33 years in the Department of Corrections, mostly on a crime that I did not commit. And during which, and as my brother said, working while Black, I'd incurred a lot of repercussions for creating programs, starting movements from behind the wall, which benefited Black and brown folks, and also litigating successfully against the Department of Correction in numerous instances. And so with that, I want to welcome everyone to this discussion, and I want to start the panelists with an open topic of discrimination while Black, right, is within the Department of Correction. And what I want to talk to you about is program access. For those of you that involved in program, can you please describe your experience of the classification, working the classification? And I want to start with Kentel first, and just talk about your experience with the classification as you was reentering.
Back here?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's difficult. There's a lot of roadblocks that you face, because then you gotta go through, like, you gotta think it's reentry workers that nobody in a prison really knows. It's like reentry workers, it's case workers who are kind of combative, and these are the people you have to go through to apply for housing, to get a social security card, to get a birth certificate, to get all these things you're gonna need when you come home. So I already realized just from seeing other people going through the process of reentry that it was gonna be a frustrating process. So I was like, it's not really worth the headache. I got too much to deal with. I already have too much to deal with going home as it is. So I'm like, why frustrate myself to the point where it was like, I'm just gonna leave here frustrated and angry and mad, not getting the things that I didn't, that I'm entitled to. So I just was like, I asked my mother, did she have my birth certificate? And luckily she had that. She had my social security card. And that was kind of like, it worked to my benefit. But if I didn't have that, then it's like, I would have been in an even worse situation than I was. So I just gave up on the reentry. I gave up on asking the caseworker for anything because I seen it was just gonna be such a hurdle. And it shouldn't be like that. It's like, that process should be way more accommodating. Because as soon as we go home and we do something wrong, it's like the first thing they throw at you is recidivism. The person leaves within a certain amount of years, you come back, and so we always talk about recidivism, but we never talk about like the things that led up to that person coming back to prison. You're not being set up for success, then how do you blame the person for coming back? And like, so I don't know, I always had a problem with that. And so, yeah, luckily I just had good people in my corner, and I went home to a good situation, my family, my girlfriend. I ended up going to a Salvation Army program, and they have a program out there, which they gave me a caseworker type dude, and he helped me with a lot of dentist appointments and drove me back and forth to certain places where I needed to be. But none of that help that I needed before I left prison even came, period. Like I didn't get it the way I thought I was gonna get it, but I kind of like, I already know. So I don't know. I feel like that process should be a little bit better. It definitely should be better than it is now.
David?
Definitely.
Just to piggyback off what my brother Kentel was saying, I want to talk about a little deeper issue, a little systemic issue, and how the Department of Correction systemically discriminates against Black and brown versus our counterparts. And when we say classification system, just unpack a little classification system is a set of variables that determines what security level you come from. You got max, medium, and ultimately minimum. Now, the Department of Corrections' job is to prepare you from reentry from the day you step into. So when you go from max, it's called a meaningful step down process. And the purpose of that is to slowly acclimate you back to society. So what we found in the history of the Department of Corrections is that they were discriminated against Black and brown by using things such as STG. Not forget involving yourself in STG activity. STG, for those who don't matter, means security threat group. That can be from a block, from a national gang, a local gang. You can sit at a table. You can be STG for anything. So what they found is that, well, actually, after let's back it up a little bit. When Father Gagan was killed in Susa, the classification system underwent a revamping. And it was under Governor
Baker?
Mitt Romney.
Okay.
He formed this committee to do an overview of the classification system. And what they found was that deliberately, these reports say they were discriminating against Black and brown people. So they revamped it and they gave it a different classification system. It was 9 variables. But somehow the Department of Corrections, as always, found the way to even circumvent this score system. So what we found is that minimums were for, well, let's be real, white people. They was getting the benefits of pre-release. And Black and brown people was met with these overrides to stay in medium and maximum security for some of the silliest reasons. And some of this was outright blatant. I'm not saying this is some mythical, just pulling a black card. The data that Mac did tedious work to get proved it. So I myself went through that. I think the director of treatment at MCI conference said, you might hold a record for most denial. They denied me from 2016 all the way to my release with minimum. I'm talking about a guy who was running the restorative justice in Concord. I was running the needs program in Concord. I was a college student. They kept constantly reminding me of what I did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 12 years ago. And how do you overcome that? Now, what we have is, we know after doing 20, 30 years, financial stability is one of the main crimes we consider. A man or woman does 20 years. He or she may not have the same support he or she had when she went in. People die off, relationships break up. You do 20 years. Now you go home. The point of the step down for you to pre-release and be financially stable when you get home.
Right.
Because now you have options. You can take a breath. You can take a breather. So a man such as myself, who once lived a life of crime, I come home, I have nothing. I just did 20 years. What do you think? I'm stressed. My kid wants chunky cheese. My kid wants sneakers. My wife wants big bills. You're eating up food. You're like, I gotta go do something. And what are we gonna do? We're gonna revolt. We're gonna result back to what, that's not an excuse, it's just a reality. We're gonna go back to what we knew. I gotta make a quick buck. It's hard out here. So when people often ask me what's the biggest barrier, I always say the classification system, because once I understood it, I was like, wow, they're systematically setting us up to come back. Once I'm like, wow, so this needs to be addressed. And that is what I say is one of the biggest hurdles of reentry for classification for us coming back, because the Department of Correctional Classification System is systematically setting us up back, and it's clear. You don't have to unpack it. There'll be a scholar to see it. The data's there, and they're doing it, and they don't care.
Supreme, I have a different question for you and Minister Randy. First, I wanted you to talk about, what do you mean when you say advocating while Black behind the wall, or working while Black behind the wall? Can you give us some examples of that?
Please, let's look at a historical precedent with W.E.B. Du Bois, double consciousness, living behind the veil. Being Black while incarcerated is already a mark against us. But in my case, being a 5% in Black was a double strike. Whenever we came as the solutionaries, we are the change we wanted to see. When you talk about reentry, I beg your pardon, I never heard of anything in the Master's Department of Corrections. There is no reentry process.
Correct.
We are our reentry. And currently we are quantifying our reentry process because we have an army of men and women who have returned back to society by going through our pedagogical approach to reentry. Reentry is both psychological and psycho-emotional. And each one teaches according to their knowledge. So we say that we live out our reentry while incarcerated through restorative justice. And what restorative justice means is that justice has to be something that we do within ourselves first and foremost. We have to recognize the harm that we've done. We have to stand up and accept accountability for that harm and then march forward in realistic ways by bringing about transformative experiences for everyone we encounter, beginning with ourselves. So working while Black in the Master's Department of Correction has caused me to be moved from prison to prison to prison, because as a community builder, that's what we do. We build communities. We start with our own community, and then we extend our hands out into other communities. So where, for instance, the Norfolk Lifers Group, and I'm gonna name names and call it like it is because I speak truth to power, and it's just what it is. Nothing matters but now. The Norfolk Inmate Lifers Group, which is a committee chock full of white men who all, for the most part, committed crimes of passion. They were citizens. They will be given every opportunity to embark on initiatives. If I would propose, and my counterpart would propose similar initiatives, would be gunned down.
Okay.
Would be gunned down in wholesale. Because I'm double discriminated, I'm Black and I'm a 5%er, their ignorance, we talk about culturally competent programs, they're culturally ignorant to programming, because if they had eyes to see beyond the lens of discrimination, they would know that we were the change agents in those communities. They would know that we were the impact players in those communities. They would know that we were the ones that the community was following. But because of systemic racism in the Master's Department of Correction, they use that, our Blackness, our culture, our religions against us. But to what effect? None, because we know we're the change that we've been looking for, no matter what security level, no matter what broken classification mechanism, all we got is us.
Right.
So we hunker down, building our silos, our ciphers, our circles, and make sure that we were the community that we needed. Today, we are the experts that the world has been waiting for. So I would say, to summarize, my answer to that question is, there is nothing that the white man was bound to respect coming from Black men inside the Master's Department of Correction. And we just didn't give a damn about what the hell they were going to respect or what they expected from us. We was going to do the work of community building, and that's why we're here today. Please.
Mr. Randy, same question. That's the one that works. I had worked in the Department of Corrections.
Yeah, so, peace. So yeah, I'm glad to be on this panel. I'm the only one, you know, that really didn't serve time, but I used to always tell the brothers I am
You did
serving
time,
time.
yeah, man.
Yeah, I did the bit. But I tell the brothers, I had a furlough every day, I could go home and come back. But for the better part of that time, I was really in the prison literally every day. And I had an opportunity to travel, because every day I was at a different facility. And sometimes I was at 2 and 3 facilities in one day. So I got a really good opportunity to look at the culture across the board in the DOC. And so working while Black, what does that mean? You know, it's doing this work. Like these brothers here, like I know them all personally, spent time with them. We were doing a lot of great work. You know, our work was to go inside the prison, obviously as someone from my community. You know, my objective is to go in there and help my brothers, because I know that they are not defined by the crime that they committed. I understand that our people committed, you know, the acts that we may have done to get us in prison in the context of our community being under assault through the crack epidemic that was spawned by the CIA and its government, bringing crack cocaine into Black communities, also bringing high-powered guns into our community, and then crafting laws to entrap Black men in prisons. Most of them, as you see here, who went into prison as teenagers, who were young men. And so my objective was going inside and giving to the men that message that I received on the outside that took me from being a gang member in the street and put me on a positive trajectory. And that message, at the root of it, is a knowledge of self and Black consciousness, a knowledge of our history and our struggle that our young people are disconnected from, and which leads to a lot of things. Doing that work in the prison, I felt every day as if I was behind enemy lines. You know, they didn't want me. It took me 10 years to even go and to be hired as a chaplain. You know, and that was on the heels of a lot of work that was done because the Nation of Islam, the Brotherhood, was growing. I was receiving a lot of requests to service the brothers, and really what made me decide to go into the prison was the fact that the brothers' rights, religious rights, were not being respected. They were not being acknowledged as members of the Nation of Islam, and there was no one that could represent them. It took me 10 years to battle the DOC to let them know and understand that the Nation of Islam is in fact a bona fide, established, recognized religion. You know, and I mean, everyone should know that the most popular Muslim in the world is Muhammad Ali, right? Who came from the Nation of Islam. And probably second to that is Brother Malcolm X. And of course, today, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. But they were acting as if though the Nation of Islam did not have a presence in the DOC. So I had a battle to get in. Once I got in, they didn't want to see the work that we were doing. And not just the work of the Nation of Islam and me as a Muslim, but the work of waking up Black men, resurrecting Black men, and then unifying us, right? And so I seen a lot of great brothers, like these brothers here, that were like in the streets, right? That were really respected for who they were, but who had transformed their lives. And now we're making a difference. We're change agents, and we're creating programs that the DOC didn't have and wasn't supporting. And a lot of times the DOC was thwarting those programs. So oftentimes they would collaborate with me as a chaplain. So I'm a chaplain, I'm a staff. So, you know, AAC is doing a program, and the DOC, the Director of Treatment, is giving them a hard time and denying them. You know, they want to put on a Kwanzaa event or they want to put on a Black History event, and they're denying who can come up, how many people can come up. And I would have to step in as a staff and say, no, well, you know, stamping, I'm with this and I can take that part of it. And they would be angry with me for doing that kind of work. So there was a lot of great brothers inside, and I'll be remiss if I didn't, you know, shout out, you know, Daryl Jones did a lot of great work. Allah Fuquan is doing a lot of great work. Brother Supreme, Mac, these brothers that I just named are powerhouses. These brothers were moving the culture in prison. They were established, these were lifers. These are brothers that were doing life, most of them at the time, without the possibility of parole. But regardless to what they were in there and what they were doing, they became change agents that were respected by the other inmates, and they were making a big difference. But the administration battled against, and I seen literally this brother in the hole. I've seen this brother literally have to go on hunger strikes because they trumped up charges on him because of the work that he was doing, and he knew they was lying, and he refused to accept the D report. I've seen the same with other brothers, powerful brothers that were doing this work that were met with opposition. And then in closing, I'm saying people like me who were citizens going in there and trying to work with these brothers and do these programs, I was written up. I was disciplined.
That's right.
You know, charges was trumped up on me. And oftentimes, some of the charges that Brother Mac and others faced were really, they was really trying to get at me through him. So, so yeah, being black and working while black within the DOC was very, was challenging. And it's because there's a culture, you know, and, you know, the majority of those that work there are not, don't look like us, right? And so there's not, especially when you talk about administratively and in the hierarchy, there's not a lot of black folks that are empowered in the DOC. And so that there's just a total cultural difference. I'll say this last anecdotal thing and then I'll stop. But I remember one of the events we was putting on, I think it was a Black History event. And one of the brothers that came up as a guest, gave a shout out to some of the brothers that were Black Panthers, right? And in our community, we look at the Black Panthers, we know they were a group that was set up to protect and defend our community. We also know about the food programs that they were doing and the healthcare programs that they were doing. So the Black Panthers, for us, we don't look at them as an enemy or as a security threat group. These were revolutionary brothers that were helping the cause. And so one of the brothers gave a nod to some of the older brothers that were part of the Panthers back in the day, just gave them a shout out. Man, they wanted to bar that brother from ever coming before again. And so there's a serious disconnect, you know, from the work that we're doing. This brother here, he ordered a book for Black History Month, They Came Before Columbus, by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. He was told by the director of treatment, you can't get this book because that's not rooted in reality. That's not real. You know, that's not good. So they literally are dictating what books brothers can receive, what messaging they can receive, and who we can celebrate as our leaders. And so that's the problem.
Just to give context to with the minister's last comments, and just so that you know, when you say AAC, he's talking about the African Heritage Coalition Program. For those that don't know, there was one of many cultural programs that exist behind the wall. Spanish United, Asian Heritage. These programs are really the root foundation of what comes out of a lot of these movements. And so even as we speak today, there is a movement by the Department of Correction on the brothers in Norfolk trying to get them to actually reform the AAC, Spanish United, and Asian Heritage Coalition by making them apply as self-improvement group, even though their grandfather clause in. And the reason why I know this is because I sat on the actual focus groups when Harold Clark and Chris Mitchell wrote the actual self-improvement programs and the pre-existing African Heritage Coalition programs. I personally brought that question up to him. So what does this mean? Because you have this one part says inmate coordinator, and we have a board structure here. And he said, oh no, all the pre-existing boards, all the pre-existing programs that are in will remain operating the way that they are because they train men and women into how to run nonprofits. This is what the commissioner said, and this is why the programs has been running the same, even though the inmate self-improvement policies has been in place, right? So if we want to replicate of those programs at other institutions, then what we do is we go through that policy practice. But now, if not the pre-existing ones. So what they're trying to do is by doing this, forcing these brothers to do this, is actually assault on the Harriet Tubman projects. Things that they can't articulate and control within the project. The very same thing they ran across with me and Diamond down OCCC, trying to confine and tell us what Black culture is or should represent.
Right.
And now this is what they're doing. The Harriet Tubman Project, the joint venture, We Are Joint Venture rather, and CELWA, all those organizations that came out of self-improvement groups. So I just want to make this clear that when we're talking about the real, so we're not just talking about something that happened yesterday, we're talking about something that's constantly happening at this very second, this very moment.
Yeah.
Right? Even though Norfolk is situated differently than any other prison and is ran as a community prison for the purpose of getting men and women, well, excuse me, men, because women have never experienced the Norfolk experience, but getting these men ready to transition back out into society. This does not make no sense. The other thing I want to just expound on real quickly is when David was talking about some of the classification variables in his particular situation where they already did away with the STG, security threat, as a variable, right? The Department of Corrections still was using this variable to say, well, this excludes you from minimum. Even though he's classified it, hadn't had a ticket in almost 4 or 5 years. So I just wanted you to understand the context. Here is someone who's doing everything he's supposed to do according to the classification policy and practices, and they tell him, they give him a list, achieve these programs, and you will receive this. He does all those things, and they're still talking about something that happened back in 1997. Mind you, it is 2020.
For real.
So I just want to give you context when we say that these are the real life challenges that Black and brown folks that keep them out of lower security, keep them out of pre-releases. And as Kentel can verify himself, him and I was down the minimum, and it took me, after I was paroled, 3 months to actually get down to minimum. They wanted to do a triage. Now, the reason why I want you to understand this, and I want to kind of bring light to this, is that this is not about beating up DOC. This is about really articulating the realities of Black and brown experiences that set us back, right? So here I was given 9 months to go down to minimum, 3 months of which I had to fight them, fight the department to say, why are we doing a triage on me? I've already been paroled. What purpose is this? In the meantime, a white guy who was a personal friend of mine also was paroled a month and a half later, right? And he still made it to a minimum way before me. He got seen, got classed, and he was gone within 30 days, which is the way the policy practice actually works when you're paroled. That is the way it works. So I just wanted to give you some highlights, some understanding about what we're talking about here, some of the challenges that they face, right? And with that, I just want to open up the floor at this time for any particular questions on some of the subjects that we already just talked about. Do anybody have any comments, any questions, what have you?
I want to scale in something about
Go
the
ahead.
working while Black classification process, right? For me, it's about the doing. It's about doing the work. We can take on titles, we can come in different clothes, but the reality is that build is build. I said that to say this, right? The mark of working while Black, having worked in Norfolk, going through every single channel, inmate council doesn't work, it's not respected. Realizing that these modes of transportation, they're not effective because they were designed to bring about divisiveness amongst us as a community. So when I decided, you know what, I need to talk to every person in that community, including chaplain, including the representatives from the Corrections Officers Union, including my brother, who was one of my really first advisors, as well as Sister Ruth Wright of the Catholic Church in doing this initiative, because I know it takes community to build community. Now, spending 10 years building up the Restorative Justice Initiative to the point that we've sat down with the sitting governor, the Honorable Deval Patrick, at the time, to the point that we went from initial proposal, which was entitled Building Community Through Restorative Justice, a public safety initiative for the residents of MTI Norfolk. Because there was a gang riot in the Westfield, in the alley leading to the Westfield on Christmas Eve. And the gift that we needed to give to the world was us coming together. And that's what Restorative Justice allowed us to do, is recognize those who are doing the work. Didn't care what race, didn't care what religion, did not care what program affiliation, so on and so on and so forth. 10 years after building a robust community of care, I was abruptly lifted up out of that prison working while Black.
That's right.
And transported. Here's the classification piece. We know that the classification mechanism gives the authorities the right to suspend it for 48 hours. Then, once that 48 hours has been exhausted, they have to go in and do the necessary paperwork to justify that emergency move. I was moved out of Norfolk after building this robust community that had scaled beyond barbed wire, walls, and fences in the form of the Transformational Prison Project. And I'm humbled because that was a vision that took place inside of the prison, built by prisoners, and today led by responsible parties, formerly incarcerated men. They moved me like a slave. 13th Constitutional Amendment is real. They moved me out of that without justification, without classification. To date, there is not a singular piece of paperwork on record to why they moved me. Why? I had about the lowest possible point they score, I can have 3 points. I was not justified in being moved, working while Black, and the broken mechanism of the Massachusetts classification system. And it's important to understand, I love that, it hurt me that I was moved, I'll be honest, because we built a community of care and we were still in that building process. However, all they did is allow us to go to another prison and branch out and do that work.
Absolutely. So with that said, is there any questions, comments?
First of all, my brothers, I appreciate you because, again, Bruce Bickerstaff. But the point is, this is a continuum beyond. You spoke to the Black Panthers. The fight is still the fight. How can we be in assistance to break the matrix of? Because, and like you said, this is in policies institutionalized and passed on through that secret handshake, if you will. How do we continue to support breaking the paradigm? I'm thinking of something that I heard the other day around the Attorney General, Andrew Campbell, who has family situation that has had people incarcerated. Can we, when we last on, right? Can we think about how we set goals and policies to bring this to the attention for, what do they call it, forensic analysis? To start to understand the stories of the brothers and sisters and start decentralizing, breaking that stuff down.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. I think that there's a lot that could be done. So we're having this meeting here. One of the initiatives that was started by a brother right now that's serving life, which is a Lobson Quan, working with myself, which was another program that was started by inmates behind the walls, that was frowned upon, and really they try to shut it down, which is a program or an initiative that we call the Know Your Smoke, right? And the Know Your Smoke is about educating our Black men in particular about the legislative process. Because right now, so for example, we was at the State House just this Wednesday, and there's several bills that can help change that reality, right? Change the reality of what's behind the walls. So one of them was raising the juvenile age to 20, and there's some that's advocating even up to 24, where the science says the frontal lobe is fully developed. Many of our young Black men in particular who are in jail doing life bids went in as teenagers, right? Or young men and have done 20, 30, 40 years in prison. So that's a law that state, we can change that law. There's another law, which is the second look, which allows after 15 years, regardless to what your sentence is, that the judge can take a second look, even if you had a first degree and re-sentence. And then there was a joint venture and there was others. But my point is that we can change some of these laws, right? And even what we're proposing here with oversight, but we have to, so what can we do? We have to engage in activism. Know your smoke. I say that the black men are really like the sleeping giant, if you think about it, in the political process, particularly the Democratic Party. The black woman, was heralded as a savior, right, of the Democratic Party. As far as putting Biden in, you got the Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris's. Everybody recognizes the force that black women are and their impact. What no one speaks about is black men. So we're like the sleeping giant because many of our brothers have checked out of the process. And so that's where the Know Your Smoke campaign comes in, and even the Black Men's Political Task Force, right? We have to go out there and we have to, by addressing these issues that are real, relevant to black men, that's a way to tap them into the process. We have to make the connection, and then we have to engage the legislators to change the reality that exists now.
And I want to add on to that. Throughout this process, I've paid close attention to the fact that me and Brother Mac used to talk about this, like policy. Like, I think there needs to be a people change more than a policy change, because like the classification policy, as it reads, there's nothing wrong. If they followed it the way it was, it's the Calmichis and the other people who are in power who are personally circumventing these policies to their own personal belief, arbitrarily, that makes the process systemically racist. I just want to point that out right there. So I guess it can start with the legislative process, because you can raise what I've learned is no matter what the legislative body do, and she can attest to that, I want to say, rep here, that the DOC always finds a way to circumvent the legislative progressiveness. And they somehow, somewhere, they know no more segregation. They find another name, they just dress it up different, put a pink nose on, call it something else, and then there's another fight we gotta fight now. It takes 6-7 years to fight that. They are very cunning and very skilled at circumventing and getting their way. So it has to start maybe at the top, maybe who's in power, who's the commissioner, it can easily change. The question is, do they want to change? And that's what I've learned. Like when I started testing, hold on, I'm reading these policies and I started to understand. I said, this is actually all right. But they don't follow none of them. It looks good on paper. Right. So we got to start with the people and the laws. Because even the juvenile life, when they started doing that, they said they couldn't do it. They can go to juvenile, they can go to minimums. They started, as you know, coming up with arbitrary reasons not to send the juvenile life. They had to fight the first 4 years of that policy being outlawed, being like the little cabins and it's coming up with arbitrary reasons to keep them. And that made their fight even harder. They had to come in. There's always a clash with the department. They have too much power, too much free will, so to speak, too much discretion. And I just want to know sometimes that's where that's part of the reason. Not saying there'll ever be a friendly prison. Right. I don't believe that exists, but that's a whole thing.
Please, I will say this towards your question, and I'm appreciative of that question, right? In this room, there was this notion of 6 degrees of separation. That is no longer applicable when it comes down to the criminal legal system. It's more like 2 or 1.5 or 1, right? We know the numbers, so we don't have to wax nostalgic on these numbers, right? One of my heroes, Michelle Alexander, she wrote the New Jim Crow, she wrote the New York Times article, that if we think we're going to legislate ourselves out of this, we're out of our minds. Right. I personally walk forward in this world with a philosophy that it's never either or, it's and in both. So it's required and mandated that we change policy as well as change the culture.
Right.
When we talk about all things being made new and they're being made new, I don't know who's sleeping at the wheel and who's not paying attention. Because when you look here in the city of Boston, you look increasingly around the state. What you see at the helm of nonprofit agencies are formerly incarcerated men and women. Yet we still experience this suppression. So I say that to say this, that it's gonna require this intricate web of all of us and none of us. We're all interconnected in a web of relationships. The center of that web is our nervous system. If one of us are in pain, and this is not the slave mentality, if one of us in pain and we are responsible parties, we do stand up and say, I accept responsibility for the harm I caused and I want to be held accountable in a realistic way. And you all accept responsibility for harms you caused systemically on a municipal level, a state level, and a federal level. Now this web is flushing out with greater depth, length, and over a period of time, we will see the change that we desire to see in society today. It's happening. I'll say that all of you in this room, as advocates, allies, I don't know what that means. You know, this could be a feel-good moment. Right. But it's about 4 pounds of work. And we are the new leaders today. And if this movement cannot humble itself to that type of leadership, we're doomed to repeat the errors of the past. That's
a fact.
I feel like it's raising awareness too, and this is like one of the platforms to do it, like raise a man's call, raise whoever's consciousness about what goes on, what really goes on inside there. You know, nowadays it's like so mainstream. People think they watch 60 Days In, and that's the prison experience. They watch Love After Lockdown, and that's the prison experience. Like, yo, nah, that's not it. You talk to somebody like Supreme, you talk to somebody like Mac. Once you hear like what they're going through, and they give you an actual breakdown of what we're being met with behind those walls is different. I can only talk to experience. Like been on those planning committees, even invited me to be a part of those planning committees for cultural events, and I'll just be watching. And the first event will be like, for instance, the first event would be in a gym, and there's 100 and something people in there, and I'm like, damn, I missed that. And it's like, yo, it's ill. I'm like, and this is me just learning about the cultural events and Kwanzaa and Black History Month and me wanting to get in and all of that. So I'm like, all right, that's cool. And then he invited me to the planning committee. And then he comes with a new grievance. Oh, well, this one is in the prison room. And it's only 60 people. Like, oh, it's a cap now? Where'd the cap come from? Went from like 100 and something people to like 60 people. And it's like, well, yo, why is that? And then we'll do another event. And it'll be like Martin Luther King Day or something like that. And then he'll come back with another one. He's like, well, we can't have outside supporters no more. We can only have 5. They limited it to 5. So it went from like 20 to like 5. But I'm like, I don't want to call it racism, but like, this is something not right about us. It's like, it keeps dwindling to something that's lesser. So it's like, I'm seeing they like trying to destroy whatever like community we trying to build in there. And it was like, that's evident. So it's like seeing stuff like that, it's like, it's evident. I don't need empirical data, none of that. I've seen it with my own eyes, like, all right, this is the opposition. This is the oppression, this is it. So,
Well, you wouldn't be able to call it that if they did it across the board. The only thing they were doing to us, the Christians and the other program, they wasn't doing that.
They did another one in a friend of ours, he was in like the Protestant services. He said, I'm gonna do an event in the Protestant services. And this is the same time when they was breaking us down and capping the numbers. And then he did one inside the church. And then it was just like, they didn't even care. And the church was so packed, it was people standing outside the church. It was crazy. And so I'm like, how is it cool here and not when we do something that's the equivalent? It was just weird. I'm like, all right, this, and Emma always pointed out, oh, this is it. This is what this is what I've been talking about. I'm like, all right, you're right. Yeah.
Well, you know, part of that is the psychology of it. Because what we don't talk about is that how people take that home with them, right? How it impacts them in their views of the world. And I think there was at least a quote that Edward Flynn said back from the Mitt Romney's administration about how you teach people how to observe the law. If the corrections are not going to observe the rules and regulations, then you set the incarcerated up the incarcerated community up to be the same way, to not trust in those rules and regulations, even when they're outside of the world, right? But in many ways, what I found is that when we talk about the Black and brown experience, until white life is lost, until white tragedies happen, then we do overviews of everything, right? And that has been my experience in the Department of Corrections, and that's been my observation of what happens in the Black and brown community, unless the person or the injured person happens to be a child. If the person has to be a child in the Black community, then we will stop everything and try to figure out what really happened, right? But then when it comes to the loss of life of Black and brown folks, just on a daily basis, it's not even televised, it's not respected, it's not even, it's like whatever. And that's the same message, the same thing that happens behind the wall. Part of, to answer your question, it's not just looking at ways, and part of what I'm trying to present today, as well as the REICI, is trying to have this conversation about these challenges and also talking to people who are not informed about what is really going on, right? It's not trying to have the conversation about between all of us who are in agreement, but having a conversation about with folks who don't really know to the extent of what's happening behind the wall.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm trying to achieve here today. The other thing is also set out a case to say, well, this is why we need legislation like the oversight. Because in the oversight, we've already seen historically, the Department of Corrections cannot be left to self-report, cannot be left to self-improve themselves, right, as they encourage others. And so we have to now look at other ways to actually create that accountability to us and to the incarcerated community, in which why we're inviting to talk about this present legislation. And our second panelist, we hope will start filing in around the time that they're scheduled to talk. You know, okay, yes, indeed. And so to answer your question, it's legislation like we're proposing, but as my brother said, it's also about understanding the cultural changes that has to happen within the Department of Corrections, right? And when I say that, is that you have some folks in the Department of Corrections, I'm not going to slate them all one way, because they're not all situated the same way. There are some that believe in rehabilitation, but they are never promoted to those rankings, right? And so that has to be said, right? Not everybody is the same in there, but there are some folks who are in these positions that do get promoted. And I'm going to say so that we understand Stephen Kenaway, you know, who was the superintendent of Norfolk, also OC, SPCC, Susan Baranowski Correction, for those that don't know those terminologies, while he did his tenure, all this abuse happened up there, you know, where the prisoners were being beat, maced, and it was like they had like just full reign to do whatever they wanted to do, right? But here's the interesting thing about Stephen Kenaway. He was a union person. He ran the union back in the 90s. And one of his most profound statements that he was quoted from a Boston Herald article was that he said that rehabilitation don't work. They don't believe in rehabilitation. They believe in locking them up. So the question is, how does someone like him become superintendent over an institution that's by design supposed to actualize rehabilitation for everyone?
It's called the dehumiliation of the Black man.
Now, I just want to be also clear, also, that even some of those who believe in rehabilitation for some, not for all. So even when you have those who do believe in rehabilitation, they don't necessarily believe it for me or people that look like me, but that for those that look like them, and that they should get every benefit of it. So I want to say that too clearly. Okay. Question.
From reentry, trying to get your ID and whatnot, to job placements, have you guys created a centralized location outside of the system for individuals coming back in to come to and, let's see, get those resources?
So
Because we can't rely on them, obviously. But within our own community, we should be able to come back and say, you know what, I can't get my ID, nobody's helping me, can you point me in the right direction? Or I can't find a job, no one's helping me, can you point me in the right direction?
So you have a lot of brothers and sisters who are getting out, who are serving as reentry consultants and assistants. And so that when Black and brown folks who are coming out of the system, who are locked out or traditionally just don't know how to access the system, they're now helping them navigate that. And some are being paid by the state to do the jobs or working for other entities like Returning Citizens or other agencies like the Black Male Advancement, in which I've worked also for the Black Male Advancement, who've also had a real oversight of making sure that Black and brown folks get CORE relief so that they can apply for jobs, and also those other agencies like the Returning Citizens who are still developing themselves, right, their identity. And why I say that, and trying not to be a knock to anyone, right, but why I say that is because we just had a recent town meeting with Returning Citizens, and that's formerly incarcerated, to kind of talk about what they should be doing, and some of which should be contacting them brothers and sisters behind the wall, in which they have agreed that they should be doing, and we hope that will happen, right? But when it comes to just understanding how to navigate those, I had a hell of a time trying to navigate that, and I am someone with resources, right? And what I found, just trying to run from this side of the community to that side of the community to over here, where I don't even know how to use the phone that they gave me, was just incredible. Right? I mean, and so this is why I think that really those of us who decided to act as reentry consultants and assistants to our Black and brown brothers and sisters that are coming out, you know, has really been a benefit. Now, can it be greater? Yes, it can. And I think that what you're seeing, or at least hearing on some of the panelists, from some of the panelists, is a desire to really form these types of entities for ourselves, right? Build these entities for ourselves, which we intend to do. Is there another question?
Hey, Scott,
Go ahead.
on that question, right? It was Attorney Whiteside. My first Zoom was at Concord Farms. It was with Amon Coleman, better known as the Law Righteous, on the Transformational Prison Project, but they didn't have the visual, so it wasn't the full experience. That full experience came with Brother M1 and Attorney Latanya Whiteside, and I remember her asking me, "Well, who's helping you with your reentry?" Once again, I'm being very, very clear that after 33 years of incarceration and helping brothers successfully re-enter into society, doing a life sentence, I know that we are the evidence that we've been waiting for. I know that everything is in time. I said to Brother M, don't answer that question, because we have to sit down as a focus group, as a think tank, and decide, all right, who do we want at this table? Because for years, months, and days, the Office of Returning Citizens established, I don't know how long ago, one of my reentry mentor, Brother Conan Harris, had a hand in that. I cannot lie. We do not know who the Office of Returning Citizens is beyond the walls of incarceration.
Right.
I was at Concord Farm. Concord Farm is the equivalent of walking through that door in and then having the ability to walk out, and you're right back in society. Yet, I spent 7 months there idle. So I had to create another program because I've seen other brothers were idle. As M said perfectly clear, I'm very wealthy. I'm wealthy in love, friendship, support, and accountability. And my reentry process was heralded by the Transformational Prison Project and the My Turn program, Imam Taimala, and talking to brothers that reentered before me. It doesn't exist. The Office of Returning Citizens, Senator James Eldridge, who is my man, I know he's here. I want to be here. Senator James Eldridge. Some time ago, a bill was passed to say we would have IDs prior to leaving prison. That is not a reality. That is not a reality. I've been on 31 days. I've yet to been able to open up a bank account. I've yet to gain free transportation into aspects of society that I'm supposed to be a part of. Because I don't exist, I don't have an identification. So, hell no. We're not doing all within our power to bring about a change that affects all of us. Because all of us just don't give up. And that's the reality. Thanks.
Please. Go ahead, bro.
You said me?
Yes.
How you doing? My name is Jeffrey. Hello. I came in a little late, so I'm a little lost about. I was trying to find the place. I don't know how to find it. I could have got the location. Then I looked at the address. Anyway, but yeah, I think well, you know, we gotta come together somehow and find each other. It's hard to find each other. We got so many fights going on that we fight in so many different places that we so divided. You know, for example, I'm going to a fight. I don't even know if I should put this on the mic. But no, you ain't gotta turn it off, please don't. Please don't turn it off. And I'm going to every avenue I can. And every avenue I go to, they knocking me down. Like, I'm going to every step y'all sending me to go to about something I'm saying didn't happen. Didn't happen. Y'all told me there was no IA inside the 13th precinct. And now y'all telling me to come to the 13th precinct 6 weeks later to see IA. I said, y'all got me scared to death. Fighting for my grandkids. They act like they don't understand what I'm saying. I say, what do you mean you don't understand what I'm saying? I'm a 62-year-old man that I believe the cop said something wrong about. That grandfather been through this, father been through this, I've been through this. I think you miss a generation because I got 4 girls. I never figured out how did a generation be missed. I got 4 girls, I ain't got a son. Now my grandsons is going through something. So I have an appointment with IA after 6 weeks, internal affair, on Monday, with Sergeant Lieutenant Torres. That got me in there. After y'all told me there was no IA. And now I'm going to the precinct, 13th precinct Monday. So I don't want to put too much out there.
Yeah.
But this is a reality. This is happening. And I don't know how, although I've been here forever, I've been in the community, I've been helping. That's what I do. Quietly. But anyway, I'll be in there Monday. And I don't know how it took me so long to get there. It's been 6 weeks since this started. But I'll be there Monday. I just want to put that on my What is his name?
Put it on the record.
At 3 o'clock I'll be there.
That's right.
Monday at 3 p.m.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. So we need to
Totally.
find a way to come together, although we got so many fights that's separating us.
Yes.
Some of them we need to take on so hard together. The biggest ones, I guess. Thank you. How we do that? I guess that's the question.
I think part of that, yeah, sure. I think part of what you shared is what you're doing now, right? Acknowledging it out publicly. But also, I think, you know, we work collaboratively in so many different ways presently today that it's not hard to figure out how to connect with us. You know, it's just about how do we now make sure that everyone know that we exist. And part of this, what we're doing at the REICI is making sure that everyone know that we exist, what are our purpose, what our aim is for, and how we want to connect with every entity, every Black and brown entity throughout the Massachusetts corrections. We're not just thinking Boston. You know, this discussion is just not going to happen here today. We're hoping to have this discussion all across the Commonwealth in a true campaign style. so that you get to understand that everyone gets an opportunity to understand, and not just with folks that agree with us. We want to hold it in those communities where folks are really, man, saying, I'm for pro-Commonwealth, whatever that means to them, whether that's pro-police, whatever. We want to have this conversation and this debate with them also, because we're never going to get across the aisle just seeing how many people we can get to outvote the next, right? If we're talking about changing something culturally, we have to then be willing and tolerant to be able to have those conversations meaningfully. If we're not, then we're not up for the task. This is not going to change anything. We're always going to be left in a situation where it's always going to come down to a legislative vote. And that's something that we're trying not to do. So when my brother talks about changing something culturally, this is what he's talking about. Not having to rely on that type of balance in order to make sure, and which I would argue is the state of Black America today. We're always a vote away for not having our rights. We're always a vote away because of this ongoing conversation that needs to be had and needs to be accepted, right? And so with that said, I want to close the first half out and invite my brother True for intermission to say some poetry for us today. Come on, invite my brother True up. Said True. Y'all give us some minutes. Hold on. We're gonna hear from my brother Truth. Gentlemen, hey, excuse me. We're gonna hear from Truth right now.
I'm reserved.
Peace, everybody. As Mac had mentioned, my name is True. I spent a lot of time, I'm also formerly incarcerated. I spent a lot of time with the brothers that's on the panel. Minister Randy, all these brothers. I've been home for about a year. I served 16 years. I'm out on life parole. I'm a reentry coach in the city of Lowell, serving the Merrimack Valley area. I'm also in the process of launching a nonprofit which has its roots in restorative justice. It's a project that I started while I was incarcerated called Explanations from Exile. So it's a multimedia, multidimensional organization that's going to be focused on the interrelationship between urban trauma, urban violence, and mass incarceration, to really highlight the mitigating mental health circumstances that drive a lot of the violence that we see in our community, primarily focused on adult infractions, right? So right now, the primary question when we're dealing with like juvenile offenders or young adults is how old were you when you pulled the trigger, right? But the question isn't really what happened to you, right? And to what extent was the mental health, the mitigating mental health components that may have drove the behavior, to what extent was that explored at the front end of prosecution routes to ensure that you weren't being overcharged or over-sentenced? So we're in the process of launching that. We just got a grant from Mass Humanities for an oral history event for next summer, entitled Unclean, Is Urban Trauma the New Legacy? So we're going to be exploring these issues there, and some of the spoken piece, some of what we're going to be outlining there is, like I said, the experiences of formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated individuals who have been convicted for violent infractions. And I'll be performing some spoken word there, so I hope you'll be on the lookout for that event. But I'm going to share a piece with you right now called Ars Moriendi, which is Latin for the art of dying. virgin love child of the 13th Amendment. Born fully formed, of King Cotton descendant. Smack dab at the movable center of my very own theory of freedom. Persecuted for my panache. It's strange the way they hate the sun, romanticize the mirage. I had it. I had them hopelessly seduced by the black Shakespearean. They had me tied up, noosed. All I could do was bask in the experience. I swear, it's almost like they strung me up just to cut me down. Had they string lighting weaved all through my barbed wire crown, they left me spinning in the wind, just adjacent to the duck pond oasis. I was reincarnated in the form, inordinate field Negro swan front lawn on. All consumed. I was the low-hanging poisonous produce. The leaf. The pre-shrivel right before the bloom. Something like the short shelf life for the half-shelled seed, or the divine wrinkle in the timesheet. The sliced ear, the plucked eye. I was the dull sword you learn to live by. I was the false teeth you grit to keep your misdeeds discreet. Not the Judas, but the dry wine skin you knew was bound to leak. I was the foot kiss, the Decalogue. I was Solomon's unsheathed sword. I was the surviving baby's first word, the talk therapy to the death row thief, the blind spot on Judgment Day. I was the exoneration brief. I've been everything. I've been the dark age navigator, the blank page narrator, the paradox of a promiscuous sage. And you can always tell a spirit by its blunders. And more times they tend to be gender identified. So what's a sex gig to a homicide? With same motive, same moral. I've been everything. Been one with my memory. You kill a man, it's one way to become one with your enemy. I've been everything. Peace.
I'd like to thank everybody who are still remaining for the second panel. And for those of you who are out there listening via Zoom, I want to first begin by doing an opening presentation so that much of what you heard some of the first panelists talk about in their real life experience, I want to kind of now show you some of the prevailing problems in which why we're saying oversight is needed by the Department of Corrections. And then we will ask Senator Liz Miranda to actually do a presentation on an opening about the bill itself that we'll be discussing so that you guys get a kind of an overview. So at this time, I want to first talk about some of the challenges or highlight some of the challenges from the position of the Department of Corrections. With my presentation, corrections, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, slide. So we talked about earlier, so those of y'all can see the presentation, the Omnibus Correctional Reform Act of 1972. What this bill was supposed to do, and really, this is actual law on the books today. This still applies in every aspect of today. So I want you first to realize that this is what's supposed to be happening. This requires the Department of Corrections to issue rehabilitation programming throughout all its institutions, preferably to create a step-down process, which mandates a progressive classification step-down process, which entails work release, furloughs, and with the goal in mind to reduce the population and to offset the recidivism, right? Slide. This is the Mass General Law, Chapter 124, Section 1, which then gives the commissioner the power to create policy to enforce that first law, that first bill, right? But what I want you to kind of pay attention to is the highlighted sections, which the job of the commissioner in the Department of Corrections to prepare and assist each such person to assume the responsibility and exercise the right of citizens of the Commonwealth. Now, this is important because much of the programs in which we call self-improvement programs, like the African Heritage Coalition, Spanish United, Asian Heritage Coalition programs, and much of the initiatives that have been built out of that, the Harriet Tubman Project, the No Longer Three joint venture, the No Longer 3/5, also the last some. Yes, those projects have come out of these self-improvement programs with the idea of practicing citizenship, exercising citizenship. And we spoke about some of the resistance today in which the department has been doing to repel that very act of citizenship, right? Next slide. Now, here's the interesting thing. I talked a little bit about the loss of white life, and that's when the Department of Corrections seems to have or the Commonwealth itself seems to have an invested interest in wanting to reform things at that point, but not at the exclusion of the loss of black life, right? But in this is called the GCCR report, the Governor Council Corrections Council Committee, right? This was commissioned by former Governor Mitt Romney in October 17, 2003. These are the preliminary findings. Now, why I want to highlight this is because I want you to understand that this is the type of work that went into this report to reach these conclusions, right? The GCR consists of 15 current and former correctional officials, legislators, community leaders, and criminal justice experts that went into identifying 18 recommendations that the Department of Corrections should do back in June 17, 2005, right? Slide. These are the 18 recommendations that they came to. Slide. So that you get to see the full 18. What I want to focus on is these recommendations that came out of it. Slide. The department should take responsibility for bringing down staffing costs and reducing workers' absentees. Department's budget should be more closely aligned with its mission and priorities to enhance public safety in a fiscal responsible manner. The department should adopt a comprehensive reentry strategy, including risk assessment, proven programs, step down, and supervised release. Now, that is already part of the statute, so we understand that, of the 1972. There should be dedicated external reviews of inmate health and mental health services. We just know that the DOJ just recently came out with the findings that the Department of Correction has not been adhering to the statute requirements of mental health and have not invested in mental health in the way that it should to make sure that everyone that's housed in the Department of Corrections come out with support. The department should ensure the policy and procedures, including those related to inmate classification, discipline, grievances, are transparent, well communicated, have specific appeal processes, and are implemented by staff who are appropriately selected, trained, and supervised. We've heard much of how this is still a problem today, right? From the first panelists. Even though, and this is what I want to kind of highlight, the Department of Corrections, after this recommendation, they adopted these 18 recommendations. They revised a new classification system put in place by James Austin, who is an expert in these classification variables and has implemented the system throughout nationally, right? This is what is used, and still the department is facing the same problems. So when we say that it's not necessarily policy changes, it's people changes in order to change the culture of it, right? Because this is proven to work in other jurisdictions, yet it's still, at least Black and Browns are still suffering the consequence of not having it work for them. right? The department should ensure the policies and procedures and properly implement through oversight and accountability systems, including an independent investigative authority, data management, and unit management. Now, the reason why I highlight this is because our bill actually seeks oversight. Here are the experts who came together, said we need oversight to ensure that the Department of Corrections, including Department of Correction officials who work for the Department of Correction, said we need oversight, right?
What year?
And this is in June 17, 2005. So this is the consensus that we do need this in order to make sure the Department of Correction sustains itself in a way to carry out the mandate in which our society says they should, right? Slide. And here is Kathleen Dennehy, former commissioner, the first woman commissioner of the Department of Correction, coming out and publicly saying, listen, we need this oversight. So she's come out and said this. We need the oversight. I agree with the recommendations. We should implement this. Slide. But this is what we find that's going on, and I want to show you. Here, you heard Minister Randy and some talk about, and Supreme talk about the very challenges of exercising religion. Well, here is the general law that comes out of that Act 72, which mandates that these individuals have access to their own religious beliefs, right? This is the law. Now I'm going to show you in the last 3 decades. Slide. These are all the cases that's been fought by Black and brown folks over the course of 3 decades to actualize that right. I want you to take that in. Over the last 3 decades. And they're still going on today. Slide. Here's what this law requires them to do, to set up a furlough panel to actually hold furlough hearings still today. This is what it actually has them to do. They've created regulations, which I've identified the regulations and the duties and responsibilities of every institution. So no, furloughs is not supposed to just happen at minimums and pre-releases. They're supposed to happen at every facility because there's not enough minimum beds. There's not enough pre-releases bed to afford everyone a step-down process, right? But yet, they haven't even set this structure up. This is not running in the Department of Correction. We don't even know who the furlough coordinator is. And they're not holding regular hearings. Never have been since Governor Well. Slide. Now, the GCR report also identified that the grievance process was broken. We created resolutions, created law to enforce grievances, and then what came after that is that still, the grievances are still broken. They don't work. Slide. Even to the basic necessities of what Black and brown folks are supposed to get, this is what we wind up with. This is what they're entitled to. Today, they only get 3 underwears and socks for 6 months before the Department of Correction replaces those undergarments.
Right.
They're entitled to 5, they only get 3. Slide. And then, of course, we know that the GCR talked about fiscal responsibility and talked about the looming budget that the Department of Correction was given, and most of it went to overtime. 73% of the budget went to overtime, staff overtime, right? 3% of it only went to rehabilitation. And they said that a lot of this money have to be reallocated in order for the department actually to fulfill the mandates that they're supposed to be fulfilled with. But slide. Just 2 days ago, we find that there's another scandal of overtime, right? The same thing that was already complained about. The Boston Globe released this just the other day, talking about, and this is just one examination, one person that they looked at, and wasn't somebody in the DOC blowing the whistle. This was somebody outside the DOC said, you should look into this specific issue. That's That's important, right? And since this has happened, there has not been an overhaul investigation by the department in any of these other overtime issues. Slide. This is what we see. The population has been reduced from 11,000 since 2013 to 6,000 and now even under 6,000. Slide. Then what we see is the increase from 2013 to 2023 of the budget to 775 million. Slide. And then we see the cost of per cost in Massachusetts of each person, incarcerated person. This is what's supposed to be dedicated to their clothing, food, reentry, all these things.
And I just want to add one point to that. That's also because we have a very aging population. With 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 people serving life without parole, it actually costs more to have these individuals who have done their time still remain in the carceral system instead of being in a hospital or a nursing home or somewhere else where they would receive better care. But we're spending this amount of money to keep them locked up when they're not threats to society.
Slide. Now, what we also notice is that the payroll of the department has increased from 2013 to 2022, despite the fact that the population is decreasing. No one's been able to tell us why. Slide.
And they ask us for money every year to hire more.
Right.
And overtime pay per DOC employee, as we can see, has been upwards to from 2020 because what they said is COVID and overtime as a result of COVID was almost upwards of 12,000. And then yet it still rivals today, even though we've been past that for some time. Slide. Now I wanted to focus on the correctional officers 1, 2, and 3, supervisors. I want to show from 2022 to 2021, the average base pay of every officer and overtime, right? There's a 23% increase, 19% in 2021. Slide. Slide. But the average overtime doesn't tell the story. Why? Because in 2022, total overtime pay for these COs collectively came up to 53 million of the budget and some change. Now, slide.
Triple your salary.
Wow. I wanted to make this case because even though we've had these professionals come together and say that this is what's happening, this is what needs to be done, the department, we're in 2023, the department has not been able to do it alone and by itself. And even though the professionals have said we need oversight, we need to have someone in there in which our bill presents in that, still there has been great resistance. And where has that great resistance come from? It's come from the Makufu Union and those who are invested, who are getting money out of this, right? And this is what it comes down to. They say, oh, of course we want to rehabilitate. Of course we want to see folks do that. We don't want to see people come back, but the numbers don't lie, right? The numbers just don't lie. It tells a different story. So they're invested in our failure. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about the real life tragedies and what these look like, you know, with that, I just wanted to highlight that, and I wanted to bring on our panelists and first start with Liz Miranda to talk about our oversight bill in which she has filed.
Awesome.
Liz?
Can I stand?
Sure.
Actually, I just got off a plane. Sorry. And this is why this is so important to me. And I wanted to make sure that I'm here with my colleague, Senator Jamie Eldridge, who's been in the legislature much longer than me. But one of the lead authors of the Criminal Justice Reform Act of 2018. That was the year that I actually got elected. I didn't come into the State House until 2019. First, thank you, Mac. I'm having a moment. I saw Supreme, I saw you, I saw David Baxter, I saw True. These are men that I was visiting in my first year. I see a lot of other folks too, because I actually, when I was elected in 2018, I was the only legislator that had an incarcerated sibling in the Mass DOC. This is my hood, Roxbury, born and raised, Dudley Street girl, went to John D. O'Brien. I actually came from Silver Slipper, where's my cracked tea? I've been drinking that thing for 30 years and it doesn't get old, but now I'm the senator of the 2nd Suffolk, so I want to say welcome to Roxbury, but also welcome. And I'm not gonna talk long because in pretty much senator form, we often are invited to many, many things, and I have like a series of 7 events that I have to show my face at today. But I want to talk about a little bit about my story, why I filed the bill. I don't think I've seen a presentation by anybody as qualitative and quantitatively profound as the one you zipped through, so I just want to give it up to you. And I can say that because the Black and Latino Caucus just met with DOC a week ago. And I had 5 sheets of paper of all the things that I along with my colleagues have stressed, whether it's classification, which is happening now, which is something we should be paying attention to, whether it's food, mental health services. Well, PATH isn't working, we know it, but they have these extensive contracts. No cost calls after a fight is pushed through, but yet still they want to use the old companies that they spend millions and millions of dollars with. Yet we do less than 1% of our state business with Black and brown folks. I think there's a technology company or a phone company that could take that contract instead of Securus, which would keep feeding them money. So there's lots of issues with DOC, and I think part of the problem in my 5 years of observing this and why I file so many criminal legal system bills is one, because in my family, everybody that was male was incarcerated. My father, all 3 brothers, I already mentioned my brother Ricardo was in Sousa, and then Shirley, and then eventually Old Colony and out. But my oldest brother Arthur and my dad were actually deported. And so I've known incarceration, but I've also known family separation. And in 2017, what actually led me to leave my dream job, which was running a community center in Roxbury. For those of you that grew up in the city, you know that your community center or youth worker means a lot to you, right? And so after years in the Boys and Girls Club, Roxbury YMCA, the OP Teen Center, I was finally running my own. And then my brother went to a Boston nightclub and never made it home. And it changed me forever, like many moments in your life. I don't wish this upon anyone because it's a pain and a grief that I still work through every day to show up for the people of the 2nd Suffolk. But one of the things that it did do for me, that it made me want more, it made me want better, right? And I couldn't sleep for 3 months, even though I was paralyzed in grief. And so eventually I was encouraged by former youth in my program to run for office. I run for office. And because I was going to visit my brother, I started to show up and not realizing that I had this power, right? I was now a state rep, and at that time, 2019, and I didn't have any political experience before that. I know I ran a campaign in Beat for Men and was super excited to win. And you know how to say that, women power. Went on the same night as Ayanna, Rachel, and Nika and myself, which was the first time in Massachusetts history where 4 Black women won same night. So I went with that energy, but going to visit my brother, I had a new set of eyes. You know, if that's a good explanation for that. And with the new set of eyes, I would see people from my neighborhood or people who would stop me and be like, you don't know me, but my girlfriend is your Facebook friend, or my mom grew up with you, or you go to Morning Star Church and my auntie or my grandmother goes to church. Can you come visit me? Can you work on something for me? And eventually what it led was to work with my colleagues to run this sort of task force that we had on prison visitation, because I realized at that moment, I asked one question: who's coming? who's coming, and they would mention 2 or 3 names. Russell Holmes goes to Norfolk consistently. They were mention Eldridge, and I forget 1 or 2 other people. Gloria Fox. That woman hasn't been in office in over a decade, but they were like, Foxy was coming.
Yep.
You know, she was never forgot about the brothers. And I was a new rep trying to think about, well, what will be my legacy? You know, what will be the thing that I will do? And I realized that the care and custody of people that are incarcerated are on us. They belong to the 200 people who work in that building as senators and reps, and to the governor. So the legislative branch and the executive branch have a lot of power with the conditions of our humanity and our dignity. And so that led me to file a bunch of bills across the continuum. I met with over 350 people incarcerated, brothers and sisters across 11 facilities. I have not gone to Gardner or Bridgewater, but I think those are the last 2 that I have left. But I've made it my point to consistently not only legislate, because that's our job. We make laws, but we also get to amend things. We need to make things better. We need to fix things. And so this year, when PLS approached me, we've always believed in prison oversight. We are 2 of the people that go there the most, along with Russell and some of my other colleagues in the Black and Latino caucus, and with the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, decided to file a set of bills in January that went across the entire curriculum, continuum. So whether it's reentry, whether it's juvenile justice, whether it's oversight, I think we filed over 30 bills among many different colleagues. And the reason why I specifically filed this bill with my colleague, Rep. Holmes, was one, to see Matt come out and give back in a real way was something very inspiring to me. And I was like, if Matt thinks this is the right thing to do, I'm gonna do it. But a lot of people do not give PLS enough respect. They're doing things on a shoestring budget. Many of the attorneys or the paralegals that work in that system do it because they love the community. It's not because it's a passion project. It's not because they're getting paid or getting recognized for their work. And it's essentially very simple. The structural racism, and I'll just fast forward here. When the police reform, George Floyd passes away, is murdered, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, all in the same week. As we know in our communities, there's been police violence before. And I still remember Sean Bell and Amadou Diallo when I was in college. And so these names are not just names, right? If you've lived in a carceral state, this district is the most incarcerated in the entire state. We still have the most non-fatal shootings and the most homicides. So locking people up isn't making us safer, right? Because there's no correlation between the 3 that is positive in any way. I worked on the police reform bill along with many members of the Black Latino caucus and our colleagues. And I specifically worked on use of force. I watched that video and I kept thinking to myself, Breonna could be me, right? And so I worked to ban no-knock warrants. I worked to create a duty to intervene. I worked really hard to ban chokeholds. Both duty to intervene chokeholds came out. The bill was passed in 6 months because everybody came together. Some people were abolitionists, but they still worked on the bill because they knew that something was better than nothing. And so that's how they came together and mobilized. But also part of that bill, something really important, we created 8 different commissions. And a lot of times people think commissions are bullshit because they're like a waste of time of a year of people's time. But in this case, the Commission on Structural Racism and Corrections was incredibly beneficial because nothing had happened before that commission was specifically studied racism in the carceral system. As we know, we didn't need to do a commission or report to state the obvious. I mean, in Massachusetts, Black men make less than 15% of the population, and they're making close to 50% of our jails. Black juveniles go to jail here in Massachusetts 7 to 8 times. White juveniles for the same thing. And there was just another report released that said there was a lot of over incarceration and over giving people longer prison sentences. So I just saw my colleague Rep. Worrell walk in, so I'll speed this up. The point of that commission is that there was a report, and so this bill is specifically looking at oversight of the correctional facility based on the recommendations of the commission's report, which I think is incredibly important because DEI is not just a buzzword for the people like us. DEB work, this is our real life, this matters to us. It's our family, it's our loved ones, it's our community, it's our neighbors. And so I just want to end by saying, since I have to leave pretty quickly, that this is where it starts. Come on, Rep Morale. Come on in. Come on in. Because I'm rolling out, so you can come in. So Rep Morale represents Roxbury and Dorchester, the 5th Suffolk District. That's the seat that I just vacated to become the senator, and he's been a great partner since he's been in the State House. He's visited a lot of the prisons. He's also made sure to do the back work that many of us have to do once we leave those carceral facilities. In ending, I just want to say a little bit about the process because a lot of people ask me that. How many of you guys have been to the State House? How many of you guys have helped write a bill? How many of y'all don't know how to write a bill? Okay, that's okay, because when I started, I did in that past 6 and 3 years. So you can, there's people like this in the room who help you out, there's people behind the wall, and we're happy to announce that AACC has even passed 3 laws. And so those brothers are very brilliant to be able to put things together and advocate for themselves. I asked all those questions because January we filed the bill, it got assigned to a committee, and what happens is there's now hearings. When you hear an elected official say there's a hearing that you can orally testify or send written testimony, that's where you come in. Regardless if you're a student, whether you're a neighbor, you can literally spend less than 3 minutes and send an email or make a phone call or show up to the State House to say your opinion. It doesn't have to be very formal. You don't have to have all the facts because usually the filer has all that data with them anyway, but your stories matter. There's nothing that moves in that building without the story. And then what happens is the hearing happens, they pull out the committee decides whether they want to favorably report the bill out of committee, which means that they're not gonna kill the bill, they're not gonna sentence it to the graveyard of the 9,000 bills that we file each year. They want it to go forward, and the committee will work with the legislators who filed that bill to figure out if they need to amend it or make it more structurally sound, and then it can get passed, right? And I'm saying that because we're in the thick of our first year filing this bill. We need all of you.
That's right.
We need all of you to advocate for your loved ones or advocate for yourself. Even if you are no longer behind that wall, you knew and you know what it's like. And so your stories need to be heard by the people who are incarcerated. So please consider supporting this bill. And if you don't live in Boston, please consider encouraging a person that's been elected to serve you to co-sponsor the bill or to work with the legislators who filed the bill so that they can support it. And the reason why that matters, there's 200 of us that work in that building. There's 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. Nothing passes without over the middle line supporting a bill. And I like to argue that nothing really passes with over unless there's like 100 people that really support a bill out of the 200. And so it's incredibly important that if you have somebody that lives in Pittsfield or P-Town, that they're also chiming in because it's not supposed to be just our burden. It's just not our opportunity. The carceral system in Massachusetts needs work, and we're not as liberal as we think we are in the Commonwealth. And that's an important thing, that when someone says we're a blue state or a liberal state, we're very purple. We're very, very purple, and it's in places you don't even think. So thank you all for inviting me here today. There's copies of the bill. There's a 1-pager on the REICI. I call it the REICI. But I would love to, for my colleagues to chime in here. I know Rep. Morale is here and Senator Eldridge, and I just want you guys to have a good day. It takes a lot to take a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon to come out, but this stuff is important because together we can actually make the difference, okay? So thank you. Supreme, a big. Hi, Jamie. Thank you for coming.
Oh, no, that's not Supreme. Yes, it's not. First, thank you, Rep. Chris Rohr. Come on, take your seat over here on the panel, please.
Good to see you.
What's up, baby?
Okay, no. Okay, so we're gonna continue on this discussion with our panelists. State Rep Chris Worrell is just joining us. And I neglected to go around and to actually introduce our panelists, our distinguished panelists. So I'm gonna let them do that for themselves, starting with Chris Worrell.
Chris Worrell, State Representative for the Fifth Suffolk District.
And I'm Jamie Eldridge, State Senator for the Middlesex and Worcester District, Metro West area, and I serve as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Judiciary and one of the founders and Senate Chair of the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus. Thanks, Matt.
So with that, I have a question, given what we just saw, and I know Chris Worrell was kind of late to join us, so he didn't get a chance to see the presentation. Nonetheless, I wanted to kind of start off with the idea of first with Jamie, Senator Jamie. I wanted to ask you about your experience serving on the Racial Structural Commission and some of the challenges you face with that, just to confirm what the Senator discussed.
Sure, absolutely. So thanks everybody for coming, and Mac, thanks so much for inviting me, and Prisoners Legal Services for putting this on. So Senator Miranda had talked about when we passed police reform after the murder of George Floyd, there were 8 temporary commissions and 4 permanent commissions that were created out of that law. And so because I serve as the Senate Chair of the Judiciary Committee, I co-chaired on the Senate side all 3 structural racism special commissions. So one of them was the Special Commission on Structural Racism in Correctional Facilities. I co-chaired that with former Representative Nika Alagardo, who did a tremendous amount of work on this, and her staff did a lot of work as well. So, you know, the commission had a whole bunch of recommendations. You can find it on the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus website, from, you know, systemic, you know, racism to, you know, cultural issues within the prison with overwhelmingly white DOC staff and correction officers, with a disproportionately prison population of people of color. So that was, you know, that commission ended last December with a whole bunch of recommendations. And so, to Senator Miranda's credit, I really praise her for her leadership. Is the idea was to create this, as I know you all have a copy, is to create this independent correctional oversight to address structural racism. What I would say is that I would argue it's not even just addressing structural racism, but it's addressing just the complete lack of transparency in the Department of Correction in our county jails. And, you know, Senator Miranda talked about, you know, her going into prisons. Representative Morrell goes into the prisons a lot. I've gone a lot as well. You know, for me, just a brief piece is that, you know, for me, it's my district where a lot of the prisons are, right? So that's how I came to go to a lot of the prisons, is because I was getting asked, whether by incarcerated people or correction officers, to go to Shirley, to go to Susan Baradowski, to go to MCA Congress. That's roughly the district I represent. So, and I think the frustration for legislators is that we can go into prisons, we have a right, you know, statutory right to go into the prisons, but the reality is, as much as, you know, my staff and all of our staffs try to do follow-up, is that it's very hard to hold the DOC accountable, because, you know, if we, and this is exactly true, is when we inform the DOC that we're going for a visit, literally the day before, you know, they're cleaning things up, they're even repainting the walls. I mean, it's really that opaque. And so the problem is that when we do find problems, you know, we have the follow-up meetings, while the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, Senator Miranda talked about Black and Latino Legislative Caucus, meeting with the DOC. But at the end of the day, I think you need a structural change, an independent entity, which is the bill filed by Senator Miranda about Holmes, to actually, you know, do the follow-up. And again, it's not just about sort of the power to go into the prisons, which legislators have, but it's the power to actually, you know, punish or hold accountable DOC staff or correctional officers to get, a lot of the public records that we don't get despite requests from the legislature. So that's in my opinion, the need for the bill. And just as an example of how frustrating it is that last session, at the end of last session, Representative Mike Day and I, he's the House Chair of the Judiciary Committee, we asked the Public Safety Secretary and the DOC Commissioner, who are the current Secretary and Commissioner, who I have a fine relationship with, but we asked them to come before the Judiciary Committee just to report on this lack of data and the troubling conditions in the prisons. And at the time, again, this was under Governor Baker, but they refused to come. So they did not come to the hearing. A lot of advocates came. Some people, I believe, here came to it. So that's the frustration. That's the need for the legislation. So that's really the frustrating piece. And as much as Representative Morrell, myself, Senator Miranda, probably about 10 to 20 legislators go into the prisons. Systematically, I think it's just difficult for us to hold the DOC accountable, and hence the need for this oversight bill.
Thank you, Senator. And with that one, I have a different question for you, Chris. I know you've been visiting all the facilities as of late, and since you came on board from day one. And I wanted to just kind of note some of the observations you saw, as a Black man visiting with the historical lens of being a Black man, some of the observations you made, challenges that you faced as far as folks returning home in need of services. And in light of what we now know today is that the government had just gave out some reentry money to the Department of Corrections. All those challenges still remain a challenge for Black and brown folks coming home seeking reentry.
Amazing question. So since I've been in since January 4th, and since I've been in this seat, I've visited about 10 correctional facilities and talked to large groups of people, but most importantly, talked to having those one-on-ones. And that's the dozens, I don't want to say hundreds, I'll be exaggerating, but dozens of one-on-one conversations and talking to our brother, sister that's locked up right now. And you hear this, basically the same thing. And I try to be a beacon of hope of, this person's not treating me well with the correctional officers, or you hear that a lot. You hear when someone's about to get out. There was a guy that grew up on Four Corners. We call him Patrick Gray. So he did about 7 years in Concord, and he's coming out. And he asked me, he was like, Chris, what am I coming out to? Just like that, it hit me like, oh shoot, this was the second visit that I'm visiting. I was like, we need to look into the reentry world and push it back on the DOC. It's the saying, recidivism rate is real. I grew up in a Pentecostal household where their mentality was, if you're doing the same thing, if you keep on doing the same thing, you get the same results. Mm-hmm. So going out from prison to the real world again, you're gonna start doing that same thing. There's no structure there to help you, take that 180 turn and doing what you need to do. So when Patrick Gray told me that, I really sat back and was like, what do I need to do as a legislator to make sure that his life is gonna be not peaches and cream, but better than what it was, so he doesn't go back into Concord. So then pushing back on them, pushing back on, it's a real big boom in Massachusetts with the biotech companies, and you just need a GED. That's all you need, is a GED or a high school diploma, and you can make up to $80,000 a year. So going back to biotech, like, hey, we need some of these a connection somehow of these people to, from the time that they get out, to connecting with you, to working in the biotech space, or at least getting certified to be some kind of biotech technician. So we talked to Mass Biotech, and they're working slowly, but one of the first people in their cohort that just met on Monday was Patrick Gray. So the guy that's from my neighborhood, from Four Corners, is now, on Monday, he took his first class to become a biotechnician, whatever they're called, biotechnician, but he's on the track of making $80,000 a year now. So, you know, looking at that and seeing how now could the biotech industry really tap in to the DOC before, you know, I don't want it to always be a me. I want it to happen naturally, where biotech is coming to the reentry spaces like, hey, we could take 20, we could take 10, we could take however many that they need and put them in classes, because every class you get, every class you go to, I think it's like a $300 stipend just to go to class. So it's a real thing. So, you know, looking at that and looking how the biotech, Mass Bio, and the DOC could partnership on our returning citizen, and housing is another thing. Housing, before I even went in, when I got elected, people were coming to me like, I just got home, I need a house. I got nowhere to go. I had got nowhere to go. Now that I'm elected, there's a migrant influx, so housing is scarce to none. So, you know, connecting them with just the resources they need, and also having early conversations with Rep. Sam Montano, who's a great advocate on housing, and BHA, and seeing if when a year in your sentence, when you're about to be released within a year, how can BHA come and sign up a Jamie Eldridge to be on that list prior for him leaving, but be on that list for a year, then when leaving, hopefully have something, you know, still wait a couple of months, but being on that list for a year to, you know, rise up on the ranking. So looking at all that stuff and making sure that everyone that re-enters a community is not being disruptive, but just being a part of the community and doing what they need to do.
All right, thank you. So I guess my next question would be, and I just want to just add some clarity so that we're, you know, everyone within the sounds of our voices actually understand what Senator Jamie was just talking about, is that if this bill is passed, the oversight will be triggered by an Inspector General's office, right? The Inspector General will have the power to then go in, and because the job of the Inspector General is to make sure that the state or every agency is not wasting money, taxpayers' money, and actually doing the job that it's supposed to do. So this would be like a natural result. And actually, it has been proposed by the experts themselves who were coordinators of the GCR, but also so that you know, it existed before Governor Webb. That's most important, and it worked effectively, right? But since the doing away and the change of politics occurred for all the reasons that some of us know, you know, we have to revisit this as a mechanism to kind of seek enforcement of the basic rights and entitlements that we have, that Black and brown and everyone that's incarcerated, I would argue, has under the law, right? So this is what the Inspector General office would be able to do if and when this bill is passed. And I say if and when because much of we have to do, as much what Senator Liz Miranda called us to do, is to actually target our legislators, right? And so I wanted to just, for the next round of questions, I wanted to kind of go into, what do you suggest to push this bill forward that we should be thinking about and doing?
Sure, well, first of all, you know, and I know it's in.
Can I just interject one thing? Have you received any calls yet about this specific bills?
I am, yes, yep.
How about you,
But
Chris?
I'm the Senate Chair of the Judiciary.
Okay, how about you, Chris?
I probably have one or two from my office.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so we have to improve on that. That's my point. All right, but you was gonna say something.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, you know, I think it's important to emphasize that this, as much as the Special Commission on Structural Racism, you know, influenced PLS, you know, reaching out to Rep. Holmes and Senator Miranda to file this bill, you know, a lot of this came from, you know, the January 2020 sort of retaliation by some correction officers, perhaps all at DOC in a way, on incarcerated men at Susan Baranowski, as a follow-up to some violence that happened. And, you know, first of all, just so you have a sense, is that a group of legislators went into the prison to meet one-on-one with incarcerated men that we saw, you know, were bitten by dogs, were tased against, talked about being pulled out of their cells with multiple weapons being pointed at their heads. Extremely disturbing. And so that's, you know, a big part of this bill is the, you know, absolutely, you know, what I call collective punishment, right? Is that, you know, it's one thing to get into the incarcerated men who may or may not have, you know, caused some of the violence against some of the correction officers previously, but to punish everyone in the prison for what might have happened by a few is unconscionable. So that was the motivation, part of the motivation for this bill. You know, that is still right now an ongoing lawsuit, okay, because of how a lot of men were treated, you know, during that period of time. Again, bringing, you know, dogs into Susan Baranowski, just outrageous actions. So that's still in litigation, where I've talked to some attorneys representing incarcerated men that they're, you know, they're still going through a lawsuit process because I think there were some civil rights violations. So I say that because, you know, I think those sort of actions have to be lifted up, is that there was no accountability, right, for the DOC reacting that way. And that came from the top. That came from Governor Baker, you know, going to that prison after the original violence to say, I stand with the correction officers, you know, which is deeply disturbing. So those incidents have to be lifted up to say, you know, whatever people think about incarcerated people at Department of Corrections, because obviously, you know, there are many parts of the state where, you know, there are different opinions, or there's more allyship, if you will, with correction officers, is that at the very least, we need more transparency, right? We need more transparency. Look at the slides that, you know, Mac presented, all the money that's you know, really wasted on the Department of Corrections that could be going to education, could be going to social services, could go to healthcare, transportation. So connecting with those people in the middle to really gather more support, so that, you know, legislators and, you know, to be blunt, areas that are outside of you know, poorer communities, and get them to care more about this issue. And I think it has to be a movement. I will say, you know, as someone that founded the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus in 2015, is that, you know, there was this big movement. It was really led by Jobs Not Jails, but there was a multi-year movement, including by a lot of people here, to convince the legislature to pass criminal justice reform in 2018. After the murder of George Floyd, you know, mass outrage organizing, really the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus leading the effort to pass that bill in the legislature in the summer of 2020. That was a movement. Right now, you know, in my opinion, there isn't a comprehensive movement to pass prison reform or criminal justice reform. There's a lot of amazing different efforts by so many new groups, but there's not a coalition yet. I think that needs to come together to really create change, and quite honestly, to convince more white suburban, white rural legislators to support this legislation.
Chris? And just like Senator Miranda said before she left, was the stories. You got to come with the stories. I could say, and Senator Eldridge could say anything we want to say, but the stories to your elected officials, those are the ones that's going to make them sign on to. Those are the stories that's going to make them, you know, advocate for this bill. There was a bill that I was shaky about, not anything to do with this, but I was shaky on, didn't know I was gonna sign on to until a couple of my constituents came in the door. It was like, Rep. Worrell, you need to sign on to this. And they were like, I live on Glenway. That's in your district. That's down the street from your mother's house. So then, just hearing that, it's like, if it means so much to someone in my district, I need to be advocating for this. And this is a story that us legislators need to hear. We need to hear from each and every one of you guys. Like, I remember knocking on doors, see my guy right behind Mr. Muhammad. Him being here, I know I'm in the right place because he's a constituent. So just hearing the stories, telling the stories, and pushing your legislator to sign on, advocate for the bills, these bills, it's going to be incredible. And also, I don't have as much history as Senator Eldridge, but I do get, I do talk to the DOC. So one thing that they're starting to do is Susan Baranowski is having body cams.
Yeah.
So body cams is going to help to see what's really going on. It's a layer of transparency, but we want a little bit more transparency. So one thing that Black and Latino Caucus was pushing is having that 90-second before an incident. Incident happens. So to get that recorded, and it's not like police body cam. It actually comes with sound, everything, and it comes up to 90 seconds before the interaction happens. So it records 90 seconds with sound before the interaction happens. So we're hearing a minute and 30 seconds before a person is going into whatever's happening. Then we're getting all of that and all that intel with sound, and seeing what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, and that came to Susan Baranowski. I think it happens. This week. Yeah. Then it's continuing to go on. The Susan Baranowski, then Framingham, then Shirley, then so on. Yeah.
So at this time, I just want to open the floor before we close. I know we hit the 2 o'clock mark, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so if there is any questions.
I'm looking at this time.
So if there's any questions that anyone has of the legislators, please feel free. This is now the time to do so. No? Going once?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So, and though I was a legislator during the Governor Romney Special Commission, so at the time, the commissioner recommended an independent watchdog agency or commission. So what happened after that?
So Kathleen Dennehy was replaced.
Okay.
From much of what I've been able to obtain as an observer and a requester of these documents, that a lot of the documents the new commissioner Harold Clark never saw. So he came in with a clean slate and a what I would call a sustained view of the way the department should be ran by those who have an invested interest in maintaining that. And so he was faced with, at that particular time, a legislative body that wasn't keen on dealing with mandatory minimum sentences, including his boss at the time, who may, for whatever reasons, didn't deal with that subject also. But we did manage to pass Corey reform that year, thanks to DeVore Patrick and a whole host of others. But these are shortcomings and what I would call healthy critiques, right, of some of our legislative bodies and our former governor, who could have done more in that stead. And I would say that, to be open and transparent, that the governor did visit us down Old Colony during this time that we had a cultural clash with the administration at Old Colony Corrections. And that was spearheaded by Minister Don Muhammad at the time of the Nation of Islam, and also Pastor Dickerson of Greater Tabernacle, who was informed about the crackdown on African Heritage Coalition and to stop the programming the videos we were releasing from behind the wall that was benefiting our communities. You stopped the young kids from engaging based on representing these false ideas that we carried in or promoted at one time ourselves, right? And much of those videos are still out here in the world. But, you know, just to say that those things, so yeah, they could have done that. And for reasons, it just hasn't been done.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about white supremacy. Somebody said earlier, I think the gentleman that was sitting in that chair right there said something about the culture. I remember when I was inside, you know, and I was looking for change and so on and so forth. And it dawned on me, it occurred to me that we have to change the culture, just like this brother was saying, about how we have to, you know, atone for our own wrongdoing and then give back. And then from that right there, you know, make sure that that doesn't happen again. And if you see somebody that's going down that road trying to say, listen, this is what's happening. Boom. So, but, and I see the unity that it brought in. I'm kind of like a generation before these gentlemen right here, okay? And so, and everybody's on each other's shoulders. And I'm totally amazed with these gentlemen right here. And so, the culture, the white supremacy, based on a lot of misinformation, lies, hate, all that. Self-sustained, you know, self-sustainability, you know, so,
And how supremacy within the prisons or just in society in general?
Oh, no, society.
Okay.
I kind of think that we're touching base with ourselves and our situation and that unity that's coming from that, you know, on real issues. Nobody's trying to get over on anybody or anything like that. These are issues that should be from generation to generation. We're not even talking about ourselves. I'm not talking about myself. I'm here. I appreciate where I'm at, you know. I know where I've been, and I do not want anybody to go ahead and follow those tracks that I went through, okay? And society is supposed to be responsible for, you know, give resources to those that need. If that's the American creed, I don't know. But anyway, how would you deal with that? How would you get somebody from, let's say, a suburban place that's interested in their own communities and so on and so forth? They're not racist in a sense where it's crazy, but at the same time, well, right there you saw the overtime was like 500 something million or 50 something million. It's a big difference from 50 to 500, but it was in that range just for overtime. And as I think you guys alluded to the fact that what if this was to go to education? What if this was just to getting a birth certificate and social security number, which is ridiculous. Okay, how you gonna come out here? We all walked. I remember when they came out with the IDs for those that was around at that time. They first came out with it. So we know who we are, you know. But as soon as we walk out that prison, we're invisible. Okay, so and those gentlemen and females, sisters, women. They're on top of it. I don't see them here today, but they're working just as diligently as I'm seeing what's going on here. So I'm totally amazed. How is the suburbs going to go ahead and agree that, or they're going to come to the conclusion that we all need resources? That there's all kind of different, you know, historical things where the Homestead Act, from the Homestead Act on up, okay, where people were said, okay, we're going to take care of you. We were nixed in this. How are you gonna talk to those people that are set in their ways and they, you know, we're the highest incarcerated, the most violence and so on and so forth? How are they gonna say, what can I do? Even if it's, let me support the bill that you guys are putting forth. How do you talk to somebody like that? How, you know, if you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
You know, because there's a serious issue around.
Yeah, I say it forms like, thanks for the softball question. Yeah.
Okay,
Now,
now,
real question. I'll
okay,
answer.
I'm behind the camera for a reason, okay? So, but.
No, I'm just saying. Well, I mean, I think that to what Representative Worrell said earlier is that the stories, right? Is that, you know, you have to get, you know, people impacted in front of legislators to tell their stories, you know, and you know, that's why we try to get more legislators to visit the prisons.
Right.
I would say for the most part, most legislators are not going to go to the prisons because they just don't want to They just don't want to deal with it, so they're just happy to be in denial. So I think you then have to organize this coalition to bring people to the State House to tell their stories.
When you say go to the State House, you're not talking about just going before the committees. Are you talking about knocking on the legislative doors or making, how do you do that?
The State House is the people's house. You
Right.
can knock in anytime.
Right.
Any single time,
Mhm.
Monday through Friday. I forgot what time they close the gates. Before they close the gates,
Right.
you go in there. If you're a guy or a woman's not there, leave a message and come back the next day.
But what kind of message would you say to somebody that, you know, they're already making the $8,000 a year? Their kids are, I saw these kids running in Franklin Park yesterday. A handful of people of color in it. But they're using the park, and the park is open, just as free as the people's house, that's the people's park. But I see the value, and I see the neglect on the other side.
So when I was looking at this screen, I was looking at myself and Senator Eldridge. We are not the same people. I'm a black man from Dorchester, and he's a white.
Yeah, but he's Jamie, right?
He's from Acton. He's from Acton. He's a white guy from Acton.
Okay.
I'm 37. Been out here. I've really been out here.
Right.
And my experience is different than Senator Eldridge's experience, but we're coming together for the same cause. And there's so many people like that in the State House. There's a guy named my colleague who came in with me, Simon Cataldo. He
visited the prison.
What?
Okay, yeah. Yes.
So yes. So there's so many people like that, and it's easy, and it's talking to them to turn that light bulb on.
It's probably good to get somebody that you know in the legislature that you know they're not going to go to prison, and you got them to go. That's one of many.
But they want to hear from you.
No, they don't want to hear from Tony.
They do want to hear from you.
Let me just say, they're right. I mean, I agree. And then I know this has been a robust conversation, right? And I hate to even bring it to an end, but again, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so with that, I would just urge everyone to vote. To vote and come to this election. If your state rep, yeah, that's right. No, sure. State rep, your state senator, they're not in support of the things that you think they need to be, we need to come out and vote. That's first and foremost. Second, we need to contact our state legislators and make sure that this is a priority. And I would ask that everyone do that and encourage all your friends, wherever you have them at and wherever they're situated at. And I would say, when you visit the State House, you don't just have to visit your own state rep, the state senator, visit all of them and speak to them about this important issue to see where they're at, and to say, hey, look, don't force me to have a campaign against you. All right. With that, I'm going to end this, and thank everyone for coming out. I appreciate y'all. Thank you.